Grant, good day to you and,
Good day, Mason.
and the good people of Goodwood Audio. As we can see, we are still down a chairman. Brian is recovering from an accident. He's posted a little bit about it on social media, so if you're at all curious as to his condition, you can check out that photo, and it is revealing. He is definitely took a licking, but he keeps on ticking, as the saying goes. And you'll notice that I'm a little bit hoarse. And it's not that I've switched to Marlboro Reds, and kids don't smoke. That's from your Uncle Mason. There are some big fires like out here in kind of southern Oregon, which have blown into California. And for whatever reason, it's a good thing I was never a smoker, because it definitely, I sound like Miley Cyrus already. So shout out to Miley. But I'm sure we'll all suffer through, and I'll do my best to still enunciate in spite of the raspiness. But today we're going to discuss, as sort of a follow-up to a video that we had released somewhat recently that had a fair amount of dissenting opinions, controversy, and tone controversies, I think, are always of interest to me. And this one was about the idea of the sound differences between nitrocellulose lacquer, which is sort of the traditional paint that you would find on classic instruments, the instruments that most of us know and love, and that most of the current instruments, both boutique and from the big box companies, are still modeled after. So this would be the Stratocaster, the Telecaster, the Les Paul. These are all finished in that sort of finish. However, most companies that are painting guitars now do not use that technique anymore of nitrocellulose lacquer, because there's some inherent challenges in using it. It takes a lot longer to cure, so it can often be weeks before the time that you've painted it before you can start really handling it to buff it out and to assemble the guitar. The other is that the lacquer checks. It's an unstable finish, and it's always kind of curing all the time, even however 50, 60 years later. And it can look unsightly if you're somebody who wants the guitar to look new all the time. You're always going to, if there's temperature changes, the lacquer is going to check, which means that you see these lines and striations in the finish. Polyurethane, conversely, doesn't have this issue, because often, at least now, they're all UV cured, ultraviolet cured, and they can pretty much be ready to handle within a day after painting. So from a manufacturing standpoint, it's much more efficient. You can paint it one day and you can start getting into the buffing and assembly the next day. So it's a very short timeline. So you could see, separate from any sort of tone differences, why somebody might choose to use a polyurethane finish, especially from a manufacturing standpoint. However, I was curious as to whether there's a real tone difference, because this is something that's always purported as being a big difference between a poly and a nitrocellulose finish. So the video sought to do that. It took an Eric Clapton Stratocaster that I had from the 90s that was finished in finished in polyurethane. We recorded it, and that's, when I say we, it was me and two other local guitar players that are friends of mine, Milo and Kendrick. We all chose a Clapton-inspired part, since it was an Eric Clapton Strat, and we recorded it as it was in poly. We documented where all the knobs were. And for pretty much everything, it was either like everything was full out, or it was just like at, because there's a preamp in there, there's like a detent. So it was either at the detent, or it was full out, or the mid-range boost was either on or off. So there wasn't really anything unusual there. I gaff taped the knobs of my amplifier, so we had the exact same sounds on the amplifier. And we also used a DI, which is something that we didn't talk about in the video, but I'll show here so you can see that the differences are even present in the DI. And there was quite a bit of difference. there was quite a bit of difference between when we recorded it with polyurethane as it was original. We took it to a guitar refinisher named Tony Shroom. He stripped the guitar, he stripped the neck, he stripped the body, and he refinished it in polyurethane. I keep mixing these up. He refinished it in nitrocellulose. Okay, so it started its life, let me repeat this. It started its life as polyurethane. We recorded it. We documented everything, kept everything the same, had him refinish the guitar, and then replayed those same examples to a click track so that we were able to crossfade them back and forth with the same exact testing setup. And we found that they were quite different. And not only did we find that they were quite different, not only through the amplifier, but the DI. And then I also have today, which is something that we didn't share, which is some EQ analysis of the two different guitars. And you can see that they're also pretty different there. So I know that you watched the video. I want to know about your just initial thoughts so far as it relates to the video.
I had some predictions before I watched the video, being more like, I have to say, the average guitar player who has an opinion on this. So I went in it mostly just on conjecture. What is your thought on what might happen? And people have done tests, obviously, over and over and over again on, here is a Eric Clapton Strat done in poly. Here's the same Eric Clapton Strat, but a different guitar. So we have two different guitars in Nitro, and they might compare those. But I've never seen anyone take the same guitar, strip it, and put the next finish on the exact same guitar again. So cutting down a whole bunch of variables. And so I thought this was a really interesting video. Before I watched your video, my assumptions, my educated guess was that, to put it really simply, the poly would have more bottom end and less top end and high mids, and the Nitro would have less bottom end but a bit more of the higher mids, top end, clarity. I didn't want to start using words like, oh, it sounds more breathable and open, because like, how do you quantify that? But on an EQ analysis, and I don't know what the results are here in terms of what, if you're going to show video of the EQ analysis, but for stuff you could see, I think that the low end will be more pronounced on poly, on the thick, easier to manufacture finish, and I think the top end will be more pronounced on the Nitro, which is that kind of, obviously the more vintage, harder to manufacture finish. And then I obviously, after making my prediction, I watched the video, and I also said, I kind of recorded something which we won't need to use now, but I basically said, honestly, my opinion here is that the difference is going to be so minute. It's just going to be one of those things that guitar players split hairs over because they need something to chat about and be passionate about. And I humbly have to admit that I was wrong. The differences were a lot bigger and greater than I thought they would be. And the other thing that I appreciated about your guys' video is you weren't A-Bing in the blind tests that you did. You weren't A-Bing like, okay, take your guess, is this Nitro or is this poly? You guys went into it more like, all right, what one do I like better? Regardless of if it's Nitro or poly, you listen back to the recording, the audio examples, and you guys talked through what you were hearing. Like, I think I like option A better on this round, or I like option B. And it was kind of surprising to see the results there. And I was doing a couple jobs while I was listening to the video, so I wasn't watching either, and I was listening, and I was, man, the differences are huge when you A-B them. Like, they're drastically different. And for the most part, I think there was one example. I think the second example I liked, I'm pretty sure it was the second one. I liked the poly better, and I was like, yeah, that's my favorite. But then first and last, I think I chose Nitro when I was kind of doing a blind test listening to your video. So it wasn't straight across the board, I always pick Nitro or I always pick poly. It's like, there's differences, pros, cons, but overall for me, Nitro won out when I was kind of watching the video, but not looking at the video, if that makes sense, when I was listening only.
Yeah. And even when I did the same the blind test, I picked poly for the clean example, and then I chose Nitro for the other two.
The more overdriven ones.
Yeah, but the most remarkable thing I thought of the whole thing was the weight loss component.
Yeah.
Because I think that although there may be some people, there is certainly this brought the polyurethane evangelists out of the woodwork, which I'm going to refer to as the polyamorous crowd. They were really, it was poly or die. And they were certainly, objecting to everything that had to do with Nitro and there's no difference, etc. I came into it with an open mind. I was fine with being, with it being a myth, but it seemed like there was really a pretty pronounced difference. And I think some people's complaint was that there wasn't a control, or at least not that we showed. And I think the control that people wanted was a guitar, just one guitar, didn't matter what it was, but recorded in both scenarios. I think with the expectation that there could have been some tainting of the testing procedure that would have accounted for the differences between the first example and the second example. Like the mic was moved or something like that. Gotcha. Now I can tell you that these mics are, hard mounted into wood that are in an ISO cabinet under my house in a 410, speaker cabinet. And without
it's not like someone's walking past that and going to
it's not like somebody's walking past it. No. And as far as the amp, I had taped everything for both examples, so the tape never moved. Now, one thing I could say to somebody who might be questioning the tube amp thing, now there are differences in line voltage that can just occur, day to day. And I have actually like a digital readout on a couple of different outlets so I can see, where we are between, let's say 117 and maybe 122. You can get a fluctuation in the wall voltage day to day. That could affect how the amp sounds. Also, how long the amp was on before we started testing, that could potentially affect it. Now, I don't think to the degree that we're hearing, but it could. But this is also why we use the DI. Now, I didn't include the DI in the testing because the results were the same. And I feel like sometimes in videos, you have to make editorial choices to say, do I want this to be a 40-minute long video and include these other factors, or like is it self-explanatory enough to use the examples on the tube amp? The results weren't changed. In other words, whatever the line voltage was that day and however long the tube amp was on didn't have any impact on how the result was, and that was borne out by the DI, which isn't going to be susceptible to those things. So anyway, I think enough of that. Maybe we get into listening to some of the examples for people who haven't watched the video yet. I have some short clips that we can show to kind of get you acclimated. I should also say that many people that are the polyamorous crowd, the people that are into the polyurethane thing, most of them I think would probably admit that the weight of the guitar can have some difference. And the guitar lost 4.5 ounces.
4.5. I'm going to get you the grams for all of our metric people.
Yeah, get us the grams. But basically a quarter of a pound.
127.5 grams, which is over a third of your average guitar pedal for a reference point. A guitar pedal is usually around 300 grams, give or take. So over a third of a guitar pedal, which is not insignificant.
No, it is not. So let's, I'm going to screen share here. First of all, let me screen share to show you. This is what the thumbnail appeared as. So if you see this thumbnail, you know you've gotten to the right place.
Oh, man.
Let's see.
I know it's far too late for this now, but it would have been interesting to record with no finish as well.
Yeah, some people asked about that. I mean, because it was about those two, I didn't really consider it. But also, it would have taken a lot of, like, this video was like 5 different shoots because we had to go back to the refinishing place multiple times because you can't do all those processes at once. So like the stripping was a video, the refinishing was another video, the sanding and buffing was another video, so we had multiple trips there.
Crazy.
All right, let's take a look here. So here's one version. Here's like a clean version of the nitrocellulose versus the polyurethane, and they're just cross-faded back and forth. So you heard that one. Here's one in medium gain. So that was the cleanest one. Here's one medium gain. Same procedure. And then last one, dirty.
And for those listening, I think these are all starting. Do you want me to tell what they're starting on, or should we keep that blind until after?
Well, I mean, it shows in the it shows in the video, like there'll be like a title.
I'm just thinking for those listening on the podcast who can't.
Oh,
see
I
that.
see. Yeah, I guess if you're listening on the podcast, you won't see that it says anything. Yeah, so I think we can tell them. So, well, actually, let's play this one and then we'll tell them.
Cool.
Let's play this one and then we'll tell them. All right. So, Grant, tell the people now the order didn't change. Tell the people what they heard.
Well, I think that everyone was hearing on every video, if my memory serves, it was Nitro first for every separate clip, right?
Yeah.
And then moves into
Nitro,
poly, then back into Nitro, then back to poly for every clip. And obviously we're going from, there's a cleaner example, a mid gain, and then a dirtier gain across every sound example as well, which is cool to hear how it changes even once you add amp. Because was that all amp gain in there, or were you guys using an overdrive? Or
no, it was all from the guitar. So the guitar, that Eric Clapton guitar, has a mid boost.
Yep.
And then it has this bass and treble expander. And
so you're running a pretty hot amp, and you were pushing the amp.
It was actually a clean amp. It was a Fender Bandmaster. So,
no way.
Yeah.
That's
so all the
guitar.
distortion is coming from the guitar.
That's awesome. I'm obviously not very familiar with the Eric Clapton guitar. There is also, Mason, there's a bit of a subreddit going right now on this video that the guitar playing for all 3 of these clips was so good that people are suspecting that Clapton was actually overdubbing in studio. Can you speak to this at all?
It must be very subreddit.
I may have started it, but I was appreciating the guitar clips.
Yeah, well, I think that both those guys are professionals. They play guitar for a living, and So for them to get their take, you know, it was like two perfect ones that you're having to choose the better one, you know, like you're splitting hairs, whereas mine was like, you know, 4 takes and, you know, none of them that were like quite as clean as theirs. But you know what, I'm happy that they agreed to do it, because I think it also, when we're hearing differences between them, we can't just chalk it up to the player, you know, like if we're hearing the same thing through all of them, that's what we're hearing. So what I want to do now, for anybody who's listened to this and they're like, well, you know, you played it differently, or, you know, they're talking about the wall voltage. I have EQ analysis of the DI. So let me tell you about the DI process. So it was guitar into splitter that went in, one side went into the tube amplifier, and then we added in the same reverb in post that we did on both of them, so they have the same reverb plug-in. There's nothing that's changed about that. And the other side went into a cab Zeus, and then we applied the same reverb to that, so that then we could blend the reverb in parallel. And we actually ended up dropping out the reverb from the direct, or from the guitar, into the amp, mostly just because we wanted the feel in the room to feel like you were having some reverb. But it's a little bit easier to blend it in parallel to make it more studio-like if we used what came off the cab Zeus as the DI, and then mix that in parallel. So we had a left and right channel for that. So we could kind of have more of a wet, dry sort of feel to it. So what I have here is a stereo cab Zeus coming straight off the guitar. So this is not going through the amplifier at all. And this is what we used to blend back in the wet for what you ended up hearing as the full sound. Again, reverb was the same on everything, so there was no change. And then the cab Zeus preset is the same. The preset's the preset. It's not altered. So I have the same exact clips here. I'm going to show them to you clean, mid-gain, and dirty, and you're going to get to hear the poly and the, you know, I'll just play like a little section of it. It doesn't need to be the whole thing, but it'll give you an idea, and you'll see on the EQ analysis that they're showing up differently as well.
And so, this is cab Zeus only.
This is cab Zeus only.
Blended in. Yep.
No amp blended in. So there is no influence at this point of the tube amp. So anything related to voltage, fluctuation, or the tube quality, or how long the tubes have been on, this is irrelevant now.
Yeah.
So again, this should help out the polyamorous crowd that just loves polyurethane. All right. So here's our spectrum analysis. So we'll start first with this clip, and this, I think, since we've already identified it's labeled. This is Kendrick's part, and this is in Nitro. So let's have a listen to what we got here. And then here's the same part in poly. So you could really see there the emphasis on the low end, you know, kind of between 2 and 300 hertz. It was just huge. There's like a lot of response there in the poly, where and I kind of talked about it as sounding very constipated. Where it just has this, the low end thing was just really overwhelming, and whereas the Nitro is much more balanced. Let's listen to Milo's part now. This is the cleanest of all of them, and here we'll start with Nitro, and then we'll move to Poly. And then we'll listen to the same one, Poly. So anyway, we can play mine if you want, but I think that I think you get the idea from this. I mean, you can definitely see in the 200 to 300 hertz range, I think it's pretty overwhelmingly different. You can really see it there. And I think also to a degree, just the balance of the EQ overall, it's a pretty different thing. It's not the same sound at all.
And something I was interested in as well, looking at the EQ analysis, and this is very potentially subjective. I might be reading it a little bit wrong, but it seems like the 200 to 300 hertz is boosted on Poly, or it's a little bit hotter on Poly, not so much on Nitro. But sub 80 hertz, which if you're playing live or in studio and it's being EQ'd, this is all going to be high passed anyways. But it's interesting to see that sub 80 hertz on the Nitro seems to be coming through a little bit more. And on the Poly, it was a bit less. So it's like the 200 to 300 hertz seems to be boosted on Poly, and kind of everything else is coming out a little bit more on the Nitro, which is, I wouldn't have guessed that. And I could be wrong. I mean, some people might look at that and be like, actually, you don't know what you're talking about. But it is quite a difference. And it's cool that you guys got the DI as well to just at least give one more piece of evidence to back up your findings on all the other variables that might be coming through. So it's
and I'll make these available too in the video. If you're listening to this, obviously it won't be available to you. But if you go to YouTube and you want to just check them out yourself or download them and listen to them, I'll put all these files on a Google Drive folder or a Dropbox, and people can download them and listen to them themselves and figure out how they, I'll put the EQ analysis and I'll put the DI files, and you can listen to it to your heart's content and analyze it for yourself. But I think that it's a very interesting thing. I think that some things that I think should be named about this, that I think would speak maybe to the credibility of Poly in some way, is Fender is not known for the quality of their finishes, and that's not to say that they're not consistent, but like they're not doing the same job as a Sir or a Tom Anderson.
Is this across the board, Poly and Nitro?
I would say that on maybe the custom shop level, potentially you're getting a nice, more of a traditional Nitro finish in terms of the thickness and stuff like that. But I think my understanding is on some of the Poly finishes, they'll send it through like a planer, like after they finish it, to kind of like level it down, because it's sprayed on so thick. And you could see that even when we were stripping the Clapton, it was like super thick. It wasn't just like a light dusting of polyurethane. It was like thick, and that's not how a Tom Anderson is. It's not how a Sir is. I want to get more into that, but I want to break for a moment so that Grant has an opportunity to speak about some of our sponsors that make the podcast possible every single week.
Yeah, awesome. So first up, I'd love to tell you guys about our favorite guitar shop, especially if you are in McKinney, Texas, which is the Guitar Sanctuary. They are also on the line, as the cool kids say. They sell online pedals, guitars, amps, whatever you need. The guitarsanctuary.com is where Brian Omilion usually is, not today. He's recovering still, but Brian works out of the Guitar Sanctuary as well. And he can put your pedal board together for you, unlike anybody else in the industry. Brian is the man when it comes to pedal board setup. So you can get some awesome gear at the Guitar Sanctuary. Brian can set it up for you and get you your dream rig quickly. So check out theguitarsanctuary.com to pick up some of the guitars we might be talking about today, or some pedals, pedal boards, any of the gear you need. Go to theguitarsanctuary.com. Also, I want to tell you about monocreators.com. I actually recently did a setup with Buddy Blues. We were chatting. We worked together on a setup. He had the mono pedal board and the power supply, and I actually haven't had the mono power supply on any of my recent setups because it just hasn't lined up that way. But he had the mono power supply and couldn't say enough about it. And this is a guy that, demos power supplies, pedals, pedal boards all day long. So it was really cool to hear that feedback from him, and has a pretty cool, unique shape that doesn't take up too much space. They do gig bags, which Mason has talked about and is probably in the back of the camera shot right now. Big fans of monocreators.com. So if you want to check out their stuff, tell them the Chairman sent you. Use the code Chairmen, CHAIRMEN, and you'll also get 10% off your order at monocreators.com. Mason, I'll throw it back to you and we can get back into it.
All right. So where we were leaving off is talking about our friends like Tom Anderson and John Sir, and that how their polyurethane finish maybe isn't representative of the same thing that Fender would do. The video can only speak to this guitar. And it doesn't mean that other guitars wouldn't show the exact same results, but I do know that there are better quality polyurethane finishes that are out there and may not be subject to the same sound. So I don't know that we can make a blanket statement to say that all polyurethane guitars are bad. I'm sure that there are great ones. But I do think that in the case of some of these Fender American Standards, Fender Artist models, they can certainly be improved by changing the finish. And I think that this is likely what you would see. I can't say that for a fact, but based on my sample size of one, which I understand scientifically is not a significant enough number, I would be surprised if you're going to get simply on the lowering of the weight alone, you're going to get some changes in sound. Having something that's more breathable, presumably the lacquer, as we know, is active for forever. It never cures. There's going to be some off gassing that occurs over time. Somebody even mentioned in one of the comments that I probably will get different results with this guitar as it ages and dries out more.
Yeah,
because the finish is so fluid. So and I think most of my guitars are Nitro. I'm pretty sure. I think I have a couple that aren't. I think I have a Tom Anderson Super Strat that I would presume is not Nitro, and I think the PRS DGT that I have is also polyurethane. I think all of his were polyurethane until recently. So, and those are both great guitars and poly. So, again, I don't think it means it never buy poly, but I think that we can say, based on this example, there is, at least in the case of this guitar, a difference in sound between the two. Other
Can I
thoughts,
ask with this?
Grant?
Well, I'm just curious because we refinished. Man, this was 2012. We did a buddy setup in Australia, and part payment was an unfinished telly that he left it at his old church. A youth kid got it and stripped off the poly finish on this telly, so it was bare wood. And he wanted to pay for his setup, partly with that. So I played it. The guitar sounded incredible, felt good, loved the guitar. So we took on that guitar, sent it over to the States, and got it finished in Nitro. And so, but I honestly, for the life of me, I cannot remember how much we paid to get it finished in Nitro. Do you know roughly, let's say someone's out there right now, they love the audio examples, and it's like, I have a guitar I want to experiment with and get this done. What kind of costs are we looking at and turnaround time to actually do that?
Well,
do you have any idea?
I'm going to tell you, but I want to show you first some of the process. Okay. I'm going to tell you, but I want to show you.
You're baiting me right now, man. You've got my full attention.
So here, I want to show you our refinish montage.
So for those watching, Mason has a clip going right now.
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah,
removing the credit card thick poly finish.
Yeah, so here it is. Here's the montage. So you got to see a little bit of the work of the great Tony Shroom. So Tony, for the refin, I think it was $400 for the neck and the body, which is pretty reasonable. And
That's not bad.
I had it quoted, but it was another $200 for the stripping. So it ended up being $600. The stripping. So
if you brought in a poly guitar and said, I want it in Nitro, it'd be $600 from beginning to end, body and neck.
Yeah, or if you wanted to strip it yourself, then $400.
Yep.
But believe me, after watching him strip it, I was like, I wouldn't do that for $200.
Yep.
It's really time consuming. He actually said that ours was much easier than they normally are. He said normally they don't come off quite as easily in those big sheets.
Yeah,
and a lot of times it's much more time consuming, and so I think on the question of is it worth $600, couldn't you have just sold the Clapton Strat for whatever the value is, $1,200, let's say, and then put another $600, and bought an $1,800 guitar with Nitro, probably, maybe, but that wouldn't have been cool for the experiment. But
at the same time, I know, like, if I have a guitar I absolutely love and feels like this feels like home when I play guitar, spending $600, because it's harder to find a guitar I absolutely connect with than it is to spend $600 and improve a guitar I know I'm already going to love. You know what I mean? And so that's where I feel like it's less about, yeah, you could buy another guitar, but if you already have that one guitar you're never going to sell and it happens to be poly, then a $600 investment makes a whole lot more sense than risking trying to find another guitar just because you want to change the finish.
Yeah. Well, again, I think it'll depend on the user. Is it worth it for you? I mean, for this, it was partially just about the test, and that was why I was like, well, I'll spend the money on it and make a video about it, and it'll be good for my education, and it'll be potentially good for other people. And so I wasn't so much concerned about the dollar figure and whether it added up at the end to it being financially viable or not. It was more just like, let's see what this does, and whether there's any merit to this argument. And I think, obviously most people that are making the argument, they're not doing it to the same guitar. They're not refinishing the guitar and playing it before and after and recording it before and after. It's much more anecdotal. And understandably, there, people who said we should have had a control guitar. Yeah, if we were doing a peer-reviewed study, probably should have. But I also think the DI in a way is sort of that control, other than the guitar, and the lack of publication of that in the video is more so because it didn't show anything different. Maybe we could have mentioned that, I suppose, in hindsight. But again, the intent is like, how do we concentrate the information, relay the information and the findings in sort of the shortest amount of time possible. So the editorial choices are made, and sometimes they're not, maybe they're not the right ones in hindsight, or they're not going to appease everybody. But that's why we have this video. We have an opportunity in this video, in this podcast, to go over some of the information and get to go through it one more time. But I don't know, Grant. What do you, any other thoughts that this provokes?
Keeps coming up. What keeps coming up for me, which I remember really floored me at the time, was a previous podcast we did, and I'm blanking on his name, but the guy that did the guitar, all the guitar tests, saying nothing really makes that much of a difference. What was that YouTube? Jim Lill, which was an awesome video series, and if you haven't watched it, check it out, because it really does get you thinking on the other side of this conversation of maybe some of this stuff really doesn't matter all that much. He's more in that video series, that's really what he focuses on, and goes from, taking his, what was it, a $3,000, was it a Tele or Strat?
He had a Tom Anderson too.
Tom Anderson, and then he goes all the way through removing and changing parts to where he just has mounted strings on his workbench floating over air, and then puts a pickup underneath, and it's like, it still sounds the same. And that's kind of a very poor description of that whole video, but it keeps me thinking about that, where I was blown away watching his take on it. And also, I mean, he's thorough, but there's room for speculation and argument on the validity of the tests. But I was blown away at how similar everything sounded there. So if you would have asked me, after watching that Jim Lill video, is changing poly to nitro ever going to make a difference? I'm like, of course it's not. Like, not a chance. But then now I'm hearing these A/B examples of you showing poly versus nitro, and the differences are significant. And it's just really interesting to see these different perspectives and tests and approaches to what matters and what doesn't. And to be honest, I'm just left a little bit confused on what to think. I mean, both videos bring up some really good points. Both videos are valid, and both videos have, they speak to the end result, really, and they speak to the point they're trying to make. And so it's just really interesting to see all of this stuff come to fruition in this way. So yeah, I honestly, man, I absolutely am not saying that poly versus nitro doesn't make a difference. It obviously does. And I know I prefer nitro. I really love, the natural wearing and aging and relict kind of look that the nitro gives you, rather than it will forever look brand new. I love, when I had my Tele, before it was unfortunately stolen, the Nitro Tele, it had all these age marks, wear, checking, these like spidering going on. And I could point to certain little imperfections, like, oh yeah, that was when I was playing here, and someone knocked it off the guitar stand. And of course it was a Tele, I could pick it up, everything was fine. No headstock popping off or anything like that. But the Nitro shows the journey and the age of the guitar so beautifully, where Poly just doesn't. And Poly is more of that, always the same kind of look. And, that's good for some people, but I just love the aged look. And so for me, I think still, if someone asked me, do you like Poly or Nitro guitars? My first thought would be, I love how Nitro ages. It would be an aesthetic, shallow decision for me. But now, secondly, after that, I can also point to some tonal differences as well due to this video. And so after that long rant, I do have to say, I know that people thank you all the time for putting this effort into these types of videos, but like a heartfelt thank you, and I know I speak on behalf of the listeners as well, for doing such a high effort video for no financial that I can see, for no real gain other than just educating people and bringing people on a journey of a question that has plagued guitar players since the beginning of Poly and Nitro finishes. Like it's really cool to see a video like this come out and at the very least cause us all to be able to have a conversation with a little bit of new information kind of thrown in there.
Well, I should say it's not a sponsored video, but it is monetized. But I don't think it's at this point. I mean, I can tell you the exact amount that it's earned. It's nowhere near the cost. It's nowhere near the cost that it costs to produce. Because this actually was probably one of the more expensive videos that we made because it took so many shoots to capture all of the. Let's see. Yeah, so as it stands now, I'll share the screen so people don't think I'm embellishing this. So as it stands now, what's your guess on how much money? What's your guess on how much money?
Well, how many views does it have?
It's got almost 22,000.
I would guess it's made $275.
You would be wrong. $100.30.
$100. Come on, YouTube.
So this is luckily we're not dependent upon YouTube to make our living. But this is why people on YouTube ask for people to support them on Patreon and all these places because
it's not viable.
This was a shoot to record the original guitar, a shoot for the completion of the guitar after it was done and re-recorded, and then I think either 3 or 4 going to the refinishing place to get it.
Probably filmed. What, $1,500, $2,000 minimum to just make the video?
Probably $2,000 in shoot costs, and then the edit cost. So. This is not, that's not to say that
you aren't doing this to make money off of YouTube monetization.
Well, there's a limit, I mean, pretty much I think my analysis has been to kind of cover, this is obviously a much more expensive than normal because it just took so many shoots. But an average video, I think you probably have to get 100,000 views to break even. Probably.
Crazy.
Yeah. I think that's about the metric.
So what are your thoughts on the results? Obviously you would have had some guesses, assumptions, predictions going into this. Do you remember what your thoughts were at the beginning of this process?
I remember I thought it would lose a little weight. And I want to talk about a few more of the predictions that I had, but I want to break for a moment just to talk about a few of our sponsors that make the podcast possible. The first of which our friends over at Sweetwater in the great program that they have called the Gear Exchange, where in essence you can buy and sell secondhand used gear, and you have the benefit of obviously the backing of Sweetwater, but the additional benefit of not having to pay any seller or credit card fees or PayPal fees, so long as you decide to put your earnings on a Sweetwater gift card. You can keep 100% of what you make. And if you're going to be buying stuff on Sweetwater, just like me, probably doesn't matter. You probably want to keep that extra 10%. and you want to keep it on your gift card, and you want to be able to use that towards something that you really want. So I really love Sweetwater. I really love Sweetwater Gear Exchange. I use it now all the time. Go to sweetwater.com/use. You can set up your own account. You can start buying, start selling. Really, really great service. Secondly, our friends over at Bestronix. For all of your pedalboard needs, whether that be cables, whether that be DC plugs, 1/4-inch plugs, TRS plugs, bulk cable, whatever it is, they have it, and our good friend Brad is there to help. Go over to btpa.com, use the coupon code DACHAIRS, DACHAIRS, for 10% off your entire order, and tell them the chairman sent you. Lastly, our friends over at Stringjoy make some of the best strings in the business. Dare I say it is a boutique string company, handmade in Nashville, Tennessee, used by many of the pros, just like Joey Landreth, who was on here the other week. And man, just great stuff all around. I destroy strings, and the only uncoated string I've been able to use is that from Stringjoy. I've also started using their coated strings, which are also amazing. And they're offering 10% off all of their strings in their store, whether you want to get a subscription of strings to be delivered to you monthly, or you just want to order some a la carte. You get 10% off using the coupon code BOARDS, BOARDS. Use that coupon code at stringjoy.com and get 10% off your entire order. Tell them the chairman sent you. All right. So, Grant, what I was expecting was that we would lose some weight, because I saw the finish was pretty thick. And even
which
Tony,
you got right.
He didn't expect it to be that much. I think he thought it would be maybe 1 or 2 ounces. It ended up being 4.5 ounces. I thought that maybe it might sound a little bit more open to me acoustically. I didn't think that would translate through an amp. So I thought most of the sound differences would be noticed by me as a player, but not through a mic and a speaker. And that was the biggest surprise, I would say. The degree of difference. It could have been a different guitar for the differences that we heard. So I thought that was a surprise. I thought that it was going to be like, yeah, Nitro's cool, it ages cool, but functionally they're this. It's not different. That was what I thought that the conclusion was going to be.
Really interesting. So, I mean, again, let's say someone's listening to this and like, man, I want to do some modifications on my guitar. I could change the neck. I could change the hardware, pickups. I could get it set up, which makes a big difference in tone, especially when you're talking pickup height. I could change the bridge. I could change the finish. What are your top 2 or 3 tonal, like the biggest things that'll affect the tone if someone wants to make a change to their guitar, but they love the fundamentals of it? I wouldn't
do the finish.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say
it's not big enough.
I mean, no, I think it's big, but I just think that it puts you in the negative in a way that you probably couldn't recover. Like if I ever went to sell that Clapton Strat, I'm never going to get that back.
Yeah.
And so I wouldn't do that. I would stick with pickups, hardware. I think pickups 1. Hardware 2. I mean, setups are. I think you need to set up.
You kind of have to do it regardless, right? Yeah.
But I would say pickups would be the first thing, and then hardware second thing. Like on all my Strats, I changed the block to a Callahan. I think they sound the best. I changed the springs to raw vintage. I like the feel of those the best, especially if you're using your tremolo. I removed the back plate.
Got to get that weight down.
Weigh the screws. Yep.
I was going to ask you very tongue-in-cheek if you weighed the screws pre and post poly finish.
Oh, no, I didn't do that. No.
They stayed the same, surprisingly.
Yeah, they're the same. So I would say I wouldn't recommend somebody do that as a tone thing. I just did it because I was just curious and I thought it would make for good content. I don't think I'd recommend it to somebody to do it to a guitar unless like they were committed to that guitar for life and they thought it could be a little bit better and they've kind of done all the other stuff.
Well, if my experience with customers and the guitar industry says anything, a lot of times cost isn't even a factor. Like people will go extensive lengths to get that extra 1 to 2%.
Yeah.
Or let's say for their rig, whether that's trying, a whole bunch of different tubes in their amp, speaker changes, cabs, cables for their pedal board. Obviously, pedals change out weekly for a lot of guys. So it is it'll be interesting to see. I would love to hear, even in the comments, if you're watching on YouTube, I'd love to hear if anyone has done this or is even considering it and why. I would be really interested to hear some more on that. But that's good to know that it's not necessarily, obviously it makes a difference, but it wouldn't be your first go-to if you wanted to make a tonal change on one of your guitars. But obviously a very cool experiment, and we are all the beneficiaries of it nonetheless.
Well, it was fun. It was fun to do it, and I have no regrets. I still think it was a great video, even though maybe it didn't fare as well as we've been on a good roll lately, where we've had a couple of 200 and 400,000 view videos kind of sequentially. So this one didn't do as well, but I still there's nothing I would change about it. I think maybe we could add it in maybe a clip of the DI as I guess a control, but that's again why we're doing this podcast and video. We always have time to remediate.
The good thing about this is it's evergreen content anyways. Like this is something that'll still be valid 10 years from now. Nitro versus Poly, it'll still have.
Well, we'll know we validity. Made it if Jim Lill decides he's going to refinish his Tom Anderson in Nitro,
or his benchtop. Either one, we'll take.
Yeah, he's going to redo his workbench in Nitro. Any last thoughts, Grant, before we complete for today on this topic?
I think you've piqued my curiosity and given me some good audio examples to go back to. But I think I've said everything I need to. I was very humbly surprised at how big of a difference it actually made.
Yeah, me too. Well, if you enjoyed some of the clips, I highly recommend you take a look at the video. It's on YouTube. I'll link it in the show notes if people want to check it out. And then on YouTube, I'll also link the DI and the EQ analysis if you want to check that out for yourself and just kind of see and geek out. Happy to provide that for your entertainment pleasure. And until next time, Grant, we shall sign off, and we will see you again next week.
See you guys.